Brodes Media.
What is going on, everybody? If you are hearing this clip before the show starts, that means I'm on vacation. What I did prior to leaving is I recorded a bunch of interviews with fantastic guests, so you still had something to consume here on Brodes Media until I return. So if any news drop that's so massive and it's not incorporated into these conversations, I apologize. There's nothing I can do about it. But I wanted to at least give you something while I was away. I love you all. You're all fantastic. Subscribe if you're new. I love you. Enjoy the shows. What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into this episode of Schmoozed. Today, I am joined by the Flyers TV play-by-play voice, JJ. What's up, man?
Not much. Just taking it easy here, chilling a little bit. Not as busy as the Flyers management, of course. They've been pretty busy, but yeah, enjoying the summer.
That's beautiful. Now, before we get into what the Flyers are actually doing, I need to know, okay, so I'll give you the fan perspective, as I'm sure you've been hearing around the Flyers world. I can't wait. I know that it's still going to be a little rough in terms of wins and losses this upcoming year, but I see a vision. I'm excited. We're going to watch guys like Owen Tippett, Noah Cates. There's going to be a list of prospects throughout the years that we'll see blossom. So I'm thrilled. But from your angle, I mean, you have to watch this team, talk about this team, the play-by-play side of it all. From your perspective, what's it like? What's the juice like entering this year?
Well, it's going to be fun because it's all about building toward the future. And as you said, there is vision now. I mean, the real big problem the Flyers have had here over the last couple of years has been what exactly was the plan. I'm not saying they didn't have one. I think that sometimes it wasn't articulated to the fans and the media correctly. And so we were thinking they were going to do one thing and then they went another way. And then there's no doubt what Danny Briere and Keith Jones and company are going to do. I mean, they're clearly building for the future. They're not tanking. I have read a lot of articles that are talking about 4, 5, 6 years. It doesn't work that way anymore. You just don't have the players that long. They're already into their second or third contracts. Then they have a lot of young. You mentioned a couple of them, and there are others. If situations hold, they're going to have a goalie who's really young for goalie. I mean, the goalies age obviously slower than the rest and hit their primes later. So you're really looking at a team that's built to win, I think, in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm not to say they're going to win the Stanley Cup in the next 2 or 3, but I think they're going to be contending. I don't think this is where they have to go to the bottom. People are saying they're at the bottom. No, we're 5 or 6 more spots to fall. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're actually going to already start their rise this year. If Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson are healthy, I think this team actually can really contend for a playoff spot this year. It's not that ridiculous to think that they couldn't be in the top half of the league, given the fact that some of their young players took steps last year, hopefully take more steps. They get those two guys back. And then you add some players like a Tyson Forster or maybe an Emil Andre or somebody like that adds to the mix. And maybe Cam York, players like that take bigger steps. So to me, Brodes, it's a situation where, yes, it's about the future. And from a broadcaster, that's exciting because you're waiting to see the new pieces arrive and then you're watching to see the development of those pieces. But I also think that you're adding, in essence, 2 free agent signees in Atkinson and Couturier. If they're both healthy, big ifs, I understand that. But if they are healthy, they are basically like 2 huge free agent acquisitions. You throw those 2 onto the mix and some of the foundation they started building last year and then some of these other young players, I think this year will be a little bit more exciting than some people think in terms of a competitive nature. I'm not saying Stanley Cup, but I think they'll be very competitive. John Tortorella is a coach. They were competitive last year with all the injuries. They're not going to be an easy out for any team. They're not going to be easy for teams to beat anyhow. But now you add a little bit more talent, and I was thoroughly impressed with Andre, by the way, from what I saw of him in development camp and from what I've heard about him last year in the AHL, saw a couple of his games. When I heard about him from overseas, I'm not so sure he's not going to be with the big club this year. And then Tyson Forster last year, I mean, I've always been a big Forster guy, you know that, but he was even better than I thought once he got to the NHL level in terms of one of those guys that maybe is better at the upper level than he was at the AHL level. So, I'm excited about that for sure, and excited to see not only what they're going to bring for the future, but what they're going to bring for this year.
Yeah, the Andre thing, and look, you can only take so much out of clips in camp, but yeah, just good gap control, and then you see the transition up the ice, and then moving the puck up, creating scoring chances. I don't know what that means, but you're right. I mean, he's definitely jumped more on my radar. Let's say the last couple of months compared to where I was. But before we start getting more into players, because I could do that all day with you, I want
I
to
know
ask you
you
about.
could.
I want to ask you about Jonesy. You had a great relationship with him. You guys were awesome together, and now he's in the president of hockey ops role. And I know him and Danny together are super sharp hockey minds. Jonesy's been around the game. He's in the booth there in between the glass, I should say, during some of the national broadcasts on TNT. I heard you on TNT too, by the way. Awesome job by you. But
Thank you.
what's he like? What's Jonesy like?
Well, Jonesy, I mean, it's weird for me because for 17 years, I've heard all of his approaches to the game. And I've always said, whenever I've talked about him, that he's dumb like a fox, because his humor that, on radio and his radio show and the radio show that he had, it was, with Angela and everything, his humor was not necessarily one where you say, well, now there's a really intelligent guy. His humor was based, and he's very smart at knowing his audience. So his humor was based at the audience he had, and his humor, he was is a very funny guy, but he's an extremely intelligent guy. And in just going to skates with him or watching even a before the game skate, he picks things up that I never see. And yeah, of course, most ex players do, but he more than others that I've worked with, and it's just he's really smart that way. So I'm really excited. My initial reaction was shock because he kept it from all of us really well. I had no idea. I mean, after the fact, I thought back to some things that were a little strange now, but at the time, I wasn't thinking he was in the running.
Right.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So shock was my first reaction. My second was excitement because I really think he can do a great job. I think he's got a vision for this team, and so does Danny. I think they're actually right in lockstep there. So I think it's great. And so there was that. And then, of course, it settles in. You sit back, and I'm not going to have him in the booth anymore. So there's a little bit of bittersweet, too, because he's been a lot of fun to work with. He's just such a funny guy. And I could be having a really bad day. He walks in the booth, the kind of changes. So, but I'm going to have another great partners to work with this year. And, it's not like I'm going to be struggling at all. I'm going to have great talent, great people with me, but it won't be Jonesy. Jonesy, after 17 years, you get used to him. So I'll miss that. So there's just a tinge of bittersweet to it, Brodes. But for the most part, I'm really excited to see how he does. And, and I don't foresee the thing I'm going to miss maybe most is like, we're not even, let's say the Flyers aren't even playing and we're sitting on our couches watching games, or maybe he's even working a game nationally and I'm just watching from my couch. The first thing, if I see something happen, would be I'd text Jonesy. I can't really do that anymore because I don't want to put him in a bad spot. I'm media, and I don't want to make him feel as though our friendship means that he has to tell me things that he wouldn't normally tell a broadcaster. So I don't really feel as I've lost that, which is really going to be big because if something would happen in hockey, that's my first text. Can you believe that? That contract or. And
Yeah, I got a buddy. I do the same thing. Whenever it's hockey related, I go right to him and we
he's
talk
been
about
my guy for almost 20 years. So it's going to be. I already found that a couple times during the draft and then the free agency period where I went to text him, and I can't really text him because what can he tell me? Once, just as a story, during the finals, he was covering it, so I was still thinking of him as Jonesy the broadcaster, I guess. And Barbashev, you watch the finals, boy, he looked great in orange and black, and there was this long pause, and I said, see, I can't really text him that anymore. And he did respond saying, very, but not right now. Obviously, he's 27, just a little bit too old, I guess, for the rebuild. But I don't want to do that to him all the time now because he's now talking to me, Jonesy the president, not Jonesy my buddy. So he's still my buddy, but there's certain things I don't want to put him in a position where, he can, not want to say something or just make it uncomfortable. So I'm just not going to be able to text him that much anymore on that kind of stuff. I'll have to find somebody else to bother. Maybe it'll be you. I mean, it'll start bothering you.
And hey, at any point, we got into it a little bit. What was that during the draft? I think we did. It was the first round, and we were getting to that bunk pick, and I was like, "Hey, Perreault, do I lean Perreault here?"
Yeah, I was surprised. I think they made a good choice though in retrospect on Bonk because they didn't get a defenseman. Obviously, with the first pick, and we know why, for a good reason there. And they didn't want to wait any longer. And Perot, he is one of those short, slow guys, although unbelievable numbers. So he is kind of some people, there's a really divergent opinions on him, whereas Bonk's pretty solidly going to be a number, a second pair defenseman, most people think, in the NHL, and you can't have too many of those. And I also know Jonesy, one of his philosophies is to build from not necessarily the goal out, it's from the defense out. He just loved Vegas's defense, and loves, it feels as though that's the biggest reason they won the cup. So I was pretty sure, I think I texted that to you, that he'd probably go defense, even though I was kind of saying, hey, get another skill player. But I think that's why he's now getting paid the big bucks to do
and here we are.
Yeah. And we'll see. But the Flyers did need to add a little more depth to their defense pool. They've got, Cam York and Emil Andre and Ronnie Adder. We don't know what he is yet. And there's some other guys, stay-at-home guys like Zamula. And they've got Ginning as well. They've got some young defensemen back there. But the bottom line is adding another one doesn't hurt.
Let's go to Michkov. What was your initial reaction when he was drafted? I thought that if they were going to go get him, because they tried to get that extra first-round pick to maybe move up, and the deal fell because of Torrey Krug. I didn't think they'd get him at 7. I really didn't. And Montreal, their fan base is all pissed off. They go get the defenseman that I thought maybe could end up with the Flyers. I'm stoked. I know that the whole Russia thing is scary, and we've seen it go through with Fedotov. There's just so many things that could happen when you're dealing with Russia, but that skill level you can't pass up on, and I can't wait to see him when he eventually does get here.
To me, Brodes, it was the ultimate litmus test as to how serious they are about the rebuild, because the guy who is sitting there that went next to Washington, Ryan Leonard, is a prototypical Keith Jones, Danny Briere, Philadelphia Flyer kind of player. He's got a little snarl to his game, all-around game, great, locker room, all that stuff. He's the kind of guy the Flyers often do draft. So I knew when he was there and Michkov was there, it's like, all right, well, if they go Michkov here, we know they are, building legitimately for the future. But the other thing with that is, Jonesy's said to me many times that you have to have that super talent player. And he's even gone as far as to say, I think since, not to me, but in some interviews, that like Claude Giroux was a great player, but he's talking about even better than that. A perennial all-star player, Hall of Fame guy that you think about, when he's 7, 8, 9 years into his career, locked for the Hall of Fame. That kind of really good. I mean, there's not many. Is Ryan Leonard that? Doubtful. He might become a Hall of Fame player, but I think he's going to have a long, productive career to get there. Whereas Michkov has that kind of talent to be electrifying and to really build your offense around, build your power play around. So I thought, silly, when he was there, I thought they would go that way. But it was the final test for him, because Leonard was the guy there that really is a Flyers kind of player. So it really shows that they are in for the long haul here. And they're going to wait. Now, I don't care too much about the 3 years. If you think about it, even Connor Bedard probably won't be dominating the NHL in his first year, maybe getting closer to the second, maybe by the third. But that's Connor Bedard. Michkov maybe would have been to that, but he's going to be 21 when he comes over. If he comes over after 3, he'll turn 22 shortly thereafter. But the bottom line is, he's still going to be extremely young, and he's going to get some more years playing with men over there. So he'll develop, get better. So I'm not worried about 3 years. We've talked about this. I'm a little more worried about just the whole Russian, as you brought it up, the question mark of Russia, where we are geopolitically in 3 years. Hopefully we're in a better spot, but we just don't know. And so who knows what's going to happen. He certainly allayed some of my fears with the way he reacted and indicating how much he wants to come over here. That I would think will play into it at least somewhat. So we'll see. But worth the risk, absolutely, because I'm watching all the prospect reports come out now of players who are now property of teams, and he's right behind Connor Bedard, number 2 on every list. And as I've also said to you, you only have to go back about 2.5 years to when this was not the Connor Bedard draft; it was the Bedard Michkov draft. That's how. I mean, he was basically right there up with Bedard in terms of where was thought of. And the only reason I think he dropped off is because of what we've already talked about, the uncertainty. So absolutely had to do it. It's also one of those things where the Flyers can always say now we have one of the best prospects in the NHL for the next 3 years. They can say we have one of the best prospects, and they have another one who's just off the top 5 in Cutter Gauthier. So they have 2 of the best prospects, coming, and that's exciting. That gives the fans another something to look forward to. They already have the Tippett's and the Cates and the Forsters and the Yorks and the Addards and the Andres and some of these players. I'm forgetting some guys. Hopefully Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost, all these guys, taking these steps already here, and then 2 of the top 10 and probably close to 2 of the top 6 or 7 prospects, young prospects outside of the NHL right now are Flyers property. So that's pretty exciting.
I'm not worried about the 3 years either. And you think of it this way, and I love Cutter Gauthier, and I'm excited for him. I'm curious if he sticks at center. I know there's some speculation they might have to kick him out the wing.
Well,
I hope
he certainly looked like a wing at the World Championships, but they want him to be a center. They want him to be that big center they're going to need. Yeah, and he may very well be that, but boy, he came off the wall with the puck so well in the World Championships. It's like, wow, that would look pretty good on the wing too. So we'll see.
I know it's tough, but if you look at Mitchkov, for example, I mean, he's playing. What's the difference? I'll say it this way: going out and playing in the KHL for 3 years to grow your game. Compare that to the OHL or compare that to even NCAA. It's significantly better, and it's so much more important to the value of him growing that I don't really look at it as a bad thing that he's going to play over Russia. It's actually beneficial, but it's just the fact of where it is that scares some people. You go back to the OHL or the Q or the W or any other league all the time. To go play grown men and go play older guys who are 30, 31, 29, that type of size, I actually think it's phenomenal. I don't know. That's the way I see it.
All right. Well, you look at Connor Bedard and how he dominated this year. Would he have actually developed more with a year in the AHL? Obviously not allowed, but or even the top Swedish league or the KHL. I think those 3 leagues would all have been better than the Western Hockey League where he was, because he was playing against kids. Now, he is a kid, but we know he's got maturity of
but when you put up like 200 points and 170
how much better
points,
are you getting?
Yeah, I know. So, I'm with you.
I agree with you. I don't, from a development standpoint, the 3 years, I mean, I wish it was maybe a year and a half or 2 years instead, selfishly. But
maybe it is, though. Maybe
it could be. We just don't know. That it's an uncertainty. I mean, maybe, in 16, 18 months, Putin's not, who knows? We just don't know. It's a big question mark, and hopefully we're in a better spot globally for more important reasons, obviously. But from a hockey standpoint, that would free up, and maybe he comes over after 2, and then he's here as a 20-year-old turning 21. Nothing wrong with that. So that doesn't worry me. It's just more the uncertainty of it.
Sure. Let's get to John Tortorella, because I keep hearing from some Flyers fans that they want to bottom out so badly, and John Tortorella is such a good coach that it might actually hurt the rebuild. What I think is, and look, he is going to grind you down, and he is going to be more of the guy who will push you that extra mile. I think that's awesome, though, because when you have youth and you're going through 82 games, and let's say you are making a jump from college to pros, you have to learn how to compete in this league night to night. You need to learn how to be a pro, and John Tortorella can bring that to you in a way that others can't. So while there might be some flaws in it with a rebuild with a guy who's going to win games and probably squeeze the most juice out of a team and whatnot, there's so much that he brings to the table that I think will help you out in the long run. I actually like the idea of him being here throughout this. What say you?
Well, if you were doing a Sixers process rebuild, you wouldn't want John Tortorella as your coach. But the Flyers aren't doing that. And in fact, you can't really do that in the NHL. First of all, you're not guaranteed that much by finishing last. And second of all, we've seen teams, the Sabres, the Oilers, I can run down so many who've had high draft picks year after year and have never emerged. So it's just not as possible in hockey as it is in basketball. And the Sixers themselves are kind of an example that's a whole other story, but doesn't seem as though that worked either. They haven't been out of the second round since they did the process. So, the process isn't that's not the process. The process is the Flyers aren't going to grab for veterans and get guys on right now, guys who are in the middle of their careers or even later and might help this year, but then hurt later on. Those players aren't part of the mix anymore. And they had to subtract some players, as they obviously have done with D'Angelo and Hayes, veteran players that weren't going to fit with Torts more so than the age, but it did also eliminate a couple of guys who are closer to 30 or over 30 than they are in their youth. So what it is they're putting a premium on youth. There's no doubt about that, but they are not tanking. It's not about getting the first overall pick in 2024. It's really, they have 2 first-round picks. Hopefully the Panthers have a terrible year, right? But it's really more about at this point developing a culture, and John Tortorella is very good at that. And he's worked with a lot of young players in his career. The whole theory that he can't do that, I mean, Werenski in Columbus is a complete example of a young player. I talked to him last year. He loves John Tortorella, and he helped developing into an all-star defenseman. So, I mean, I think he's good for that. If this was a situation where the Flyers were trying to get into the top 5 of the draft for the next 3 or 4 years, he's not your guy, because he will have this team playing a little bit above what most people expect. I'm actually thinking, because of that and because of Couturier and Atkinson coming back, that this team could surprise even management and contend for a playoff spot next year. I'm in the minority on that, but the Flyers have dealt with just disabling injuries the last 3 years too. It's about time they had a year where they aren't injured. They're going to have injuries. Every team does, but not missing their best player for the whole season. Maybe not missing their best defenseman for the whole season. So, I mean, I think that if they're a little bit healthier, get those 2 guys back, add some of the youth, they could actually contend this year. So for those who want him to take, and there are people who feel that's this rebuild. It's not. Danny Briere said it a million times. It's not a tanking situation. They are preaching patience, because they're not going to win the Stanley Cup next year unless we have a huge miracle. You never say never, but the bottom line is they're already on the build back up. They're not on the dive down anymore, because they have too many players. I mean, Owen Tippett's 24. Noah Cates is 24. If they're doing one of those guys aren't going to be part of it. They're going to be 28, 29 by the time they're even competitive. So it's not that kind of rebuild. It's a rebuild that's already hit bottom and has started up, and they're just going to continue that up. And they made some great moves. The Provorov trade right at the top, and now the Mishkov picking. That's obviously the number one, but those 2 moves in particular that they've made over the last little while have accelerated that. I mean, they're now obviously on the way up with younger players, with prospects, with draft picks. So it's just the people. Maybe it's because the Sixers just did it that people think the Flyers are going to do that. They're not going to do that. Next year, the team should absolutely finish higher than they did last year. The younger players should be getting better. They've gotten some players out of here who didn't mix with Torts, and you get Couturier, Atkinson back. So with all that thrown into the mix, this team should absolutely be better. Well, if you add 10 to 15 points to last year's team, they're in the mix for a final playoff spot. So it's not like they're that far away. And to think they're going to go deeper down is just, I don't think, the way that the management sees it. And now that you have an elite talent sitting out there coming in 2 or 3 years, you have another pretty close to elite talent. He might be elite talent as well. And Cutter coming in a year or two. The process is already started. It's not in the process of going down to accumulate assets. They will do that when they can, but they already have a lot of assets, and they're trying to get those assets to get in here and improve and get better together. And Torts is a good coach for that. So I hear that a lot too, Brodes. And I've heard it from smart people who say, yeah, he's not the coach for a rebuild, though, is he? Not in that I think he'll get frustrated, as he did last year, losing. Losing eats away at John Tortorella like no one else. So that's tough. But I think, again, the worst of that is past too. I think we're going to see plenty of losses. I understand, but you're going to see it with youth and inexperience. And as they get better, the losses will go away. So I think he's the right guy. I mean, could you have better? Maybe, but I think he's a guy to build the culture. Few coaches build culture and really instill it with more will than John Tortorella. So I think he's the right guy.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I'm just laughing because I talk to a lot of people. The tone, and you said it yourself, you're in the minority. It's refreshing. It's just a different perspective that I don't hear too often. So when you start to say some things like push for playoffs and this and that, it's like,
they won't say that. Management's not pushing that narrative.
I know.
They may even tell me to stop pushing that narrative at some point.
If that's how you feel, that's how you feel.
Jonesy may say, what are you doing? You're putting the expectations too high. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I never, Brodes, go into a season ever saying they can't make the playoffs. Half the teams make the playoffs, which is starting to get to the point where the NHL is going to be the toughest league pretty soon. Baseball keeps adding teams, football keeps adding teams, basketball has gone past the NHL. But still, it's the top half. It's. I'm not saying they're going to be considered a Stanley Cup contender this year or next year, but to contend for a playoff spot, you basically have to be, a little over hockey 500. This team wasn't that far away from that last year. They had tons of injuries and had players that weren't fitting and all that. So I don't think it's that much to ask. And I also think John Tortorella is the kind of coach that will get them to maybe overperform a little bit. So if you add that on top of it, yes, I think they can compete for a playoff spot. I just don't think it should be taboo to say that. For the people who want them to tank and get top 5 picks in the next 5 drafts, yeah, they're not going to like that. But I don't think that's not where we're at with this team. And again, I don't think you can do that in the NHL too consistent. I mean, all the examples. The Sabres are the best, but 11 straight years out of the playoffs, 12 straight. They've had high picks over and over and over again. You just don't know on these guys. Nolan Patrick, Flyers had a second overall pick. Where is he? What did he?
Edmonton, what? Ryan Nugent Hopkins?
Yeah,
and it was
Nail
Yakupov.
Yeah. I mean, they had 3 and 5 years, and that didn't include McDavid, who came 2 years or 3 years later. And even with McDavid, a generational player, they haven't made it to the Stanley Cup Finals.
And Draisaitl.
Yeah.
He's probably the most underrated. Yeah. He puts up 100 points like it's nothing, and no one talks about him at all.
Yeah, he's a great player. I love people who say, well, Sidney Crosby did it because he had Malkin. Yeah, Draisaitl's very comparable to Malkin. The one thing they don't have that the Penguins had, they had Marc-Andre Fleury. And the Oilers haven't gotten that goalie, although they've had some goalies play well. Skinner last year, Smith
Mike Smith. Yeah, Mike Smith.
So it's very interesting. It's no sure thing. But the Sixers are right in front of us. An example of how in a sport where if you can do that in any sport, it's basketball. You have fewer players. Each superstar has much more impact on a team than they do in the NHL or even the NFL, unless you're talking about a quarterback. And certainly baseball. So it's just hard to do, except maybe the NBA, and the Sixers tried it. And I mean, they're competitive. They're exciting. They've certainly made a lot of money.
You want to do this right now, do you?
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying they haven't made it. The bottom line is they haven't made it out of the second rounds. And now Embiid's starting to tweak things a little with some of his talk. So we don't know. I mean, if they win the world championship, and I want them to, but if they win it next year, I'm not sure the process ever worked because the turnover has been so much since, the only thing left is Embiid, right? So if they get rid of some of these other guys. So anyhow, but we don't want to talk about Sixers, but I'm just saying, you can't really tank in the NHL and do what the Sixers did. Sixers tried it. I think if there's a sport you could try it, it was and it is the NBA.
I agree.
NHL, baseball, football, not really. You can't really do it. So
that's
not what the Flyers are doing. And I think they'll be competitive. I think they will be competitive next year. Again, if Couturier's back doesn't hold out and, Atkinson's not there, this becomes such a young team. But if those two are there, two really good veteran influences, and Scotty Lawton's still here as a veteran influence, you've got, and they've added a couple veterans and good guys like Stahl. I mean, they don't make those moves if they expect to tank.
That's another veteran. 1,000 games played, just a guy to learn the ins and outs.
Yeah, Hathaway. Paling. Those 3 guys are not acquired if the Flyers are planning on going as low as they can go next year. Why? Why would you get the 3 players? They didn't have to add players to get under above the floor or anything. They had no reason to do that other than to try to improve the culture, help the young players develop, and win some games here and there. So you can't apologize for winning. No Flyers team. Ed Snyder will, wherever he is, you're not going to apologize for winning. So they don't add those 3 players well after the dust had settled. If they aren't planning on being competitive this year, and hoping that being competitive helps the development of the young players.
JJ, you're the best. You're the best in the business, my friend. Thank you so much for joining. It was incredible. I haven't had a tone like this talking Flyers in quite some time.
Well, you can't find it on social media, that's for sure. One thing I'll say before we end this is I keep hearing this from it's really from people who aren't Flyers people, but they're irrelevant. They're irrelevant. Well, if they're irrelevant, everywhere I go when they're bad, I mean, people are like, Jimmy, what are we going to do with this team? What are we going to do with this team? Brodes, if this youth movement works, and I really think they have the right people in charge to make it work. They've already put together a pretty good pool of young players and prospects on the way. So if it works, this thing will explode. This area is such a hockey area, such a Flyers area, and they're not irrelevant. When you miss the playoffs 3 straight years, and 2 of the 3 especially were really ugly, you're obviously not going to have a sold out building, and you're not going to have people going on social media and raving about the team. But to say that although their fans went away and never to come back again, no, they'll be back. And I think some are actually back now because of what you talked about when we started. There's just a vibe now because of the youth, because of the rebuild, and because of a vision. So some of them are already back, but some won't come back until they win. That's fine. But when they win, they'll come back, and this will be, a flyered up area again. And I have no concerns about that because everywhere I go, when they're playing well, it's great. Pats on the back, free dinner. I go to Wawa, I might get something thrown in for free. When they're losing, I don't get any free stuff. I understand it.
That's why you want them to do well. It's not about the fan base.
No, more so, it's just because I have to talk people off the bridge or the ledge or whatever right now. And I've had to do it for 3 years. So I'm ready to start to revel in the success of the team. So we'll see. And I do think the corner is being turned. So we're on our way. But there's the irrelevant thing is not. The building will be sold out when they start winning again. And, that's just the way it is. I mean, I say that about any market. I've always said Brodes about Florida. People said, that's not a hockey market. They can never put any people in that building. They went from 1996 to 2 years ago without advancing the second round. I mean, you can't go that long without a playoff run in the NHL. And really in most sports, football is a different animal altogether, but you can't not have a playoff run of some sort for that long and expect the seats to stay filled. The Phillies, I was with them from 2007 through 2011, 12. 11 was our last year in the playoffs. They sold out every night. I was with them from 2012 through 2020, where they were not very good, and it was an empty ballpark until they went out and got Bryce Harper. And then they started getting better. And now, even 2 years ago, they did not have great attendance.
No.
But last year, you go to even early last season, they didn't have great attendance. But then you go to the World Series, and look at that ballpark this year. So no matter the sport, you need, even in a sports crazy city like Philadelphia, and there's no city in the United States as crazy as Philadelphia, but even in a sports city like this, if you go 5, 6, 7 years not making the playoffs or getting eliminated in the first round, you're going to lose some fans in the seats. It just happens. That doesn't mean you lose your fan base, and it might take a little bit longer to get them back when you start winning again, but they will come back. And I know, just being around town, people talk about it all the time. So I'm looking forward to that corner being turned now, and I think we're on our way.
Absolutely. You know this fan base. We're diehards, and it's that core group. We'll be there when it's all said and done. But JJ, you're the best. I love you. Appreciate you taking the time to join, and we'll stay in touch.
Always great talking to you, Brodes. Take care.